In the spring of 1906, a humble mission on Azusa Street in Los Angeles became the center of a revival that shook the foundations of American Christianity. People crowded into the wooden building, drawn by reports of prayer, worship, and the baptism of the Holy Spirit. At a time when racial and social divisions ran deep, this gathering was remarkable for its unity, with men and women of every background seeking God together. The Azusa Street Revival became the birthplace of modern Pentecostalism, and while William J. Seymour emerged as its recognized leader, another figure was already preparing to carry the fire beyond Los Angeles. Lucy Farrow, remembered as the apostle of the laying on of hands, stepped into history not only as one who helped shape Azusa, but as one of the very first Pentecostal missionaries to cross the ocean. Lucy Farrow was born in Virginia in the mid-19th century, likely in the closing years of slavery or shortly after emancipation. Very little is known about her early life, but by the beginning of the new century, she was in Houston, Texas, where she pastored a small Holiness congregation. Those who knew her spoke of her humility and prayerful spirit. Around 1905, she spent time in the household of Charles Parham, the Holiness teacher who emphasized the baptism of the Holy Spirit with speaking in tongues as its evidence. There, she herself experienced this baptism, and the experience marked her ministry with a new depth of spiritual authority. Returning to Houston, she became known as a woman of prayer, whose laying on of hands often led others to receive the Spirit. William J. Seymour, then a young preacher with a hunger for God, was deeply influenced by her testimony and the quiet power of her faith. In early 1906, Farrow traveled to Los Angeles ahead of Seymour. She joined small prayer groups where believers were already seeking revival, and she quickly became known for her ministry. Testimonies spread that when she laid hands on seekers, many spoke in tongues instantly, just as she herself had. Her presence prepared the ground for what would later erupt at Azusa Street. Yet while the revival in Los Angeles was just beginning to capture attention, Farrow accepted a call that would take her even farther. That same year, she boarded a ship bound for Liberia, West Africa, stepping into history as one of the first Pentecostal missionaries and one of the first African-American women to carry the Pentecostal message overseas. The decision was daring. Missionary travel to Africa in those days was filled with danger. The voyage itself lasted weeks, and once there, the conditions were harsh. Liberia was known as a difficult place for foreign workers. The climate was punishing, medical care was scarce, and diseases like malaria often claimed the lives of those who came. Yet Farrow pressed forward, carrying no organization or financial support, only the conviction that the God who had moved in Houston and Los Angeles would also move in Africa. Reports soon circulated back to the United States, carried in early Pentecostal newspapers, that her ministry in Liberia was marked by the same power that had followed her at home. Believers there testified of receiving the baptism of the Holy Spirit under her prayers, often with the evidence of speaking in tongues. In simple gatherings, without structure or formality, the Spirit of God fell again. Her mission to Liberia carried a symbolism that reached far beyond her own life. Just a generation earlier, her ancestors had lived under the oppression of slavery in Virginia. Now, she returned freely to African soil, not in chains, but as a bearer of spiritual freedom. For early Pentecostals, her journey stood as a powerful sign of what the revival represented. It was not bound by race, gender, or social class. It was not restricted to one city or one nation. The Spirit was being poured out on all flesh, just as the Scriptures had promised, and Lucy Farrow was living proof of that promise. Her very presence in Liberia declared that God could use anyone who was willing to obey His call, regardless of how the world might view them. The conditions of her ministry in Liberia were challenging. The heat wore down her body, and the lack of resources tested her resolve. Yet her approach never changed. She did not seek fame or recognition. She prayed for the sick, laid hands on seekers, and told her testimony of what God had done in her life. For those who encountered her, the memory of her prayers left a permanent mark. Her work was not about building institutions or leading large movements, but about obedience in the moment, one soul at a time. The fruit of her ministry lived on in the lives of those who had received the Spirit under her hands, and in the vision of revival that expanded far beyond America's borders. By 1907, Lucy Farrow returned to the United States, her health weakened by the strain of missionary life, but her spirit alive with the memory of what God had done. Her reports of revival in Liberia were shared widely in the Apostolic Faith newspaper, the same publication that spread news of Azusa Street to the world. These testimonies inspired others to take up the call of missions. Soon, Pentecostal workers began traveling to India, China, and Latin America, carrying the fire that had already leapt across the ocean through Pharaoh's obedience. While Seymour and others remained in Los Angeles to lead the revival, Pharaoh's journey had already shown that Pentecostalism was destined to be global. In the final years of her life, she continued to minister in the United States, though her health was failing. She preached in holiness meetings, prayed for seekers, and encouraged believers with the same quiet authority that had defined her ministry from the beginning. She passed away in 1911, leaving no writings and no lasting organization, but leaving behind a legacy carried in the lives of those she touched. Her ministry had crossed racial, cultural, and national boundaries in a time when such things were almost unthinkable. Lucy Farrow's mission to Africa remains one of the most remarkable chapters in the story of Pentecostalism. She carried the fire of revival from a small mission in Los Angeles to the shores of Liberia, proving that the Spirit of God could not be contained by geography or circumstance. Her life, though largely hidden from the spotlight, testified to the global heart of the Pentecostal movement. More than a century later, her story still speaks as a reminder that God often works through the humble and the overlooked, using obedience and prayer to change the course of history. From the floorboards of Azusa Street to the coasts of West Africa, her journey shines as a flame that helped light the world.